Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like wanting to hear my take on marketing, but getting my POV on markers. Which, by the way, I favor chisel-tipped low-odor markers because 1, they glide with a velvety resistance, and 2, they deliver impeccably saturated lines. Of course, it all depends on what kind of whiteboard I'm writing on and if the glossiness is at a 60%.
Okay, Marcus, I think that's enough.
You wouldn't settle for just any marketing podcast, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Welcome. We are here with the next episode of my favorite show, Market Says. It's the one where I get smarter every single episode. So that is the genius of having Dr. Marcus Collins with us. But more importantly, we have 3 incredible students from the Ross School of Business at University of Michigan. And they're going to teach us all a thing or two about Gen Z, what we thought we know and what we really know. What is the truth? We're going to dig in and figure it out. And today's a really interesting topic, Marcus. It's all about sources. I mean, I think about growing up and you remember the teachers screaming at you about plagiarism and how to source where you got your information in every paper. That was half your grade, it felt like, was how good you were at sourcing. And yet today, what's the source? Do we even know? So, Julia, Maya, Aria, we're here to talk about sources. Where do you get your information? Where is Gen Z picking up the wisdom? And do you even know what the source is, and do you care? Couple of stats to get us into it. Or Marcus, do you want to drop some stats?
I mean, this setup was just quite perfect. I mean, all I could think about is growing up, the crown jewel of our house, for my mother in particular, who was an academic, was the Encyclopedia Britannicas we had in the house.
Ooh.
She'd look at our house. Look what we had. Look at the brilliance in our house, right?
Oh, yeah.
The idea of Wikipedia just blew her brain. She's like, what is what? We're just taking the word of people and using it as citations? That makes no sense at all. But it's true. Growing up for me, if Dan Rather didn't say it or Walter Cronkite didn't say it, it's it ain't real. I don't believe it. But the question became, to your point here, is what is real? You know, there was a time when social network platforms where we got more information than the news. It really begs the question, what is real? Where do we cite or source reality? And so this group, the market represented today, will help us better understand that. So considering it Bubbler, we're all about conversations. What we like to start this conversation today is, how do conversations start? So I'll start with Maya, who is the GOAT on the podcast at this point. She's did SNL been here 5 times? She's a 5-timer. So Maya, we'll start with you here. Something you heard, you read, you saw that you feel compelled to tell someone about. And how did you source it? How did you cite it?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me back. But the most recent thing that I read was actually on Substack, and it was a piece about kind of the neuroscience behind whimsy. It was an interesting title.
Wow.
And I started reading it, and there was a stat on how there's this concept of a default mode network where someone isn't entirely present in the moment mentally. They're just not entirely focused. And there was a stat saying that about 47%, about half of adults are in that space during their time when they're awake during the day. So as someone that is part of that stat, I was like, no way, I'm focused, I'm dialed in. And I started looking into what their sources were on that actual piece. And it seemed legit. It was science.com, which sounds like the epitome of proof. And they had actual doctors and professionals behind it. So that was my first question of some information that I was given. But when I look at news sources like Substack, those are always opinion pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at those, I almost always want to look back at the sources, especially when it's almost attacking me.
Well, this actually begs a really interesting question, which almost speaks to your framing, Gail, that I wonder, Maya, would have it gotten your attention if it was a stat that seemed to be confirming your bias? if that research you heard was confirmation to your experience as a Gen Z, would you have even stopped to sort of cite check the citation? You could be honest. You could be honest.
I'm not entirely sure. Like, at least with this specific topic, it's not as polarizing per se. So I definitely wouldn't have questioned it because it doesn't seem too outlandish. So,
Yeah.
I mean, confirmation bias is huge, especially with the space we're in and the environment and the conversations we're having. So it's easy to kind of surround yourself with this bubble of information that you believe. And when you're in those conversations that are less polarized, it's even easier to kind of just say, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah. So, Julie, I'm curious to your take on this one here, because like Maya, you make a good point about Substack that they are all opinions, right? They're all written by someone who's not necessarily a journalist or not necessarily bound by sort of the standards of scientific writing. But honestly, many publications, they outsource their journalism or their writing to contributors who are also unlicensed or don't have the credentials that we expect from like a Walter Cronkite. I'm just going to keep going to Walter. He's the guy. Right? So, I mean, so the idea there is that like, can we even cite some of the publishers, the big publishers, when those people are in many ways kind of like Substack writers? No shade. Julia, talk to us. And I love you kind of weigh in on this idea of like, where does the credential lie? Does it lie at the platform level, i.e. Substack, so therefore it's opinion? Or do we look at the good housekeeping seal of fill in the blank, your favorite online publisher, and you go, that's enough for me?
No, yeah, that's a really, really great point. And I feel like similarly, actually, I was going to mention this literally yesterday. I think I just got into reading Substack articles, and that was what I was going to mention before Maya got to it before me. But I think to your point about, you know, what qualifies as someone like a credential, or what does it take for you to believe in somebody or for someone to be legitimate? I think something I've realized after consuming media, especially in like the last 2 years, people's opinions on like Substack or even like podcast hosts, I still value and believe their opinions, even if they don't necessarily have the license or, you know, some sort of scientific background. Because if it's about subjects about, you know, relationship advice or thinking about how to better yourself and growth and motivation and those types of things and those topics, who do we classify as like qualified to speak on those things? Because I think it's, for me, I take advice from people that I admire who they are as a person and I admire the traits that they embody. And so what makes, you know, my friend who went to the University of Michigan with me, they're super, super smart and qualified. They don't, you know, major in psychology. They don't have anything to like, you know, show for their expertise, I guess, which is not like real expertise. But if they're giving me advice that I think is coming from their real experience and it's worked for them, I would take it as much as I would take someone else like Alex Cooper on Call Her Daddy. She doesn't have like a real background to be necessarily interviewing like celebrities and really qualified people, but her questions are the same ones that I would want to ask these people too. Like, I don't think it takes necessarily some, you know, degree to be able to be qualified on certain topics that you're talking about. So Substack writers, outsourcing publications or articles to contributors, I think it's a lot more, I believe it, and I don't really question it as much as I think, you know, other people might. And I would pretty much believe it if it just had the name on it, or if it was from a contributor, it wouldn't really bother me too much.
So this is a good shout, and this is an interesting shout. And I want your take on this one, Gail, because I have an example I wanted to highlight here. It's an interesting shout because what I'm hearing you say, Julie, which I think is actually quite fair, that you're like, listen, I trust this person because we see the world similarly, or at the very least, I am intrigued by their point of view and how they see the world. And therefore, when they have a point of view that may not be validated by some housekeeping seal that we call a degree or some license, you go, I kind of vibe with that, right? And that's actually enough for me. And the example I want to bring up, and I'd love for you to go into this with Gail, hopefully you're aware of it. Have you heard of Dr. Cheyenne Bryant?
Sounds super familiar.
So she presented herself as a therapist.
Okay.
A clinical therapist is how she presented herself. And she talks a lot about relationships and women's empowerment, blah, blah, blah. And like, she had the internet in a chokehold. Like, women were like, tell her, Dr. Cheyenne. And they were all in. until there became a conversation about whether or not she really had a doctorate.
Oh.
And when she was called out on it, she was extremely defensive and it looked very, very guilty.
But only because she lied, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I guess, Julia, that's the question I have for you. So like, say Alex Cooper presented herself as Dr. Cooper at first, and she dropping all her relationship advice. You like tell her, oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Go ahead, girl. And then you find out that she's actually not a doctor, not even a licensed therapist, that she actually didn't finish her doctoral degree. Do you go, oh man, I feel duped? Or do you go, that don't really matter because the vibes?
It really depends. Like, if it's like relationship advice, that's something where it's like everyone experiences that, and it's not like a deep, like a medical, like it's very specific. You need a lot of knowledge about, I don't know, like it's like a cardiovascular diseases like that. I would need you to be a doctor, and I wouldn't believe anything you're saying if you didn't go to medical school.
Yeah.
But if it's something about like relationship advice or like women's empowerment, you know, I think every woman and every person that's been in a relationship has valuable insight and experiences and lived experiences that can, you know, be beneficial to learn from, or, you know, are just as valuable. I think because at the end of the day, we're all human, and Alex Cooper could experience similar things that happen in her relationship that, you know, I do or other people do. So depending on the type of expertise, my value in their licensing will vary.
Yeah.
Which the Alex Cooper example is a really great one, because I think, yeah, if she was trying to be like an actual, talking about something like super specific and required that type of credential, I wouldn't buy it at all. But
Yeah.
she doesn't, so it's okay.
Yeah. And I suppose, though, if Alex said that she was credentialed as a doctor and then you find out she weren't, would that, I suppose, Julie, would that erode the trust you had in her because it's no longer as authentic, even though her experiences were?
I think so, because I feel like that to me is just like straight up dishonesty.
Mhm.
And to me, it kind of goes back to, funnily enough, like the other episode we talked about when I was here on the show. It's kind of like a money grab. It's her licensing,
Yeah.
then her pretending to be a doctor was trying to, you know, make her seem more qualified than she really is, just so that way she could get more viewers or get more listeners and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, when I first heard about her podcast, because my older sister listens to her a bunch, I was like, why would I want to listen to her? Like, I don't even know. Is she going to ask good questions? Like, why would I trust her? And then I gave her podcast a shot, and I'm like, damn, if I was interviewing this person, I would want to know the exact same things.
Yeah.
And I think it really changed my perception of like, oh, you have this image of like who you think is qualified, who isn't. And it really made me realize my biases. And I'm like, it wouldn't matter if she was a doctor or not. Like, I would want to know the same things. And she's asking the ones, even if you don't need a license to, you know, be able to ask these great questions. So that was just the 2 cents I threw out there. Like, I was such a doubter in the beginning because I did value these credential things. And then it kind of changed my perception once I started consuming media by people that weren't like that. And it's like, these are topics that you don't necessarily need to be licensed to talk about.
I mean, it's essentially congruence over credentials, that the real credence comes from people like me. All right, Aria, you are the neophyte to Market Says. So I'm really curious, what have you listened to, read, heard, that you found yourself sort of repeating as if it were gospel?
I'm going to go ahead and move into pop culture a little bit. I think it's the year of great movies coming out. So we have The Odyssey, we've got Spider-Man, Dune. The common denominator here, of course, being Zendaya. And she is just a fashion icon. I feel like everybody's constantly talking about her looks on premieres and red carpets. Something that I've been sharing a lot recently was when her stylist, La Roche, basically went from Paris that morning, took something fresh off the runway on a Schiaparelli show, and flew it to her the same day to London. And then they made it this whole side part of the launch where he was showing BTS on his Instagram. People were talking about it, asking Zendaya about it. I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is awesome and such a good way to promote The Odyssey. And I was telling all of my friends about it. I just thought it was really like a fun moment in pop culture to be able to share with people. So I love that.
I mean, like, La Roche is an interesting one because
What are his
we
creds?
didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, exactly. but we know his crest from a fashion perspective. The interesting part here is that, like, there were all these rumors about Zendaya being married. You saw, like, you know, AI photos, blah, 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 blah. But La Roche, my understanding is that he's the one who actually dropped Dime. Did you hear that too?
Yeah, I think so. I saw that press interview where he basically was like, honey, they're already married, and then walked off.
Lisa, there it goes again about like credentialed.
Source. Yeah.
Like, who is the licensed source? And I think that like where it really gets down to is like trust. And I suppose if I'm pulling credentialed information here, the Edelman Trust Institute would talk a lot about how our trust in institutions are eroding. And I suppose I asked this question to the three of you all open popcorn style. Like, is that why we're going to these outside sources, because the normal institutions no longer either feel relevant or trustworthy based on our conversation? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ingredients thrown into the mix in the sense of Gen Z maybe not going to these credible sources as much. The first being that there have been moments or controversies in the past couple of months where people feel like what's being reported with these news publications isn't necessarily completely accurate. And so immediately you're losing that trust. I think the other thing is that we're spending so much time on social media now that a lot of times the information we're seeing on our socials is just coming across our desk first. And I think we're a generation that gets a lot of media. We consume it really quickly and really easily. So sometimes it is easier to just scroll and see what comes across your For You page as opposed to searching for the information on the New York Times or waiting a couple more days for something to get published on there. And then I would also say that trust is growing in social media as a whole in their platforms, not necessarily because of specific creators we really like or go out and seek, but because we have a lot of trust in our algorithms. And I'm really seeing this when I'm scrolling on TikTok versus Instagram Reels. I'm so much more likely to stick on TikTok and actually follow somebody or stick through the entire video because it feels like my For You page really knows me and aligns with me and my beliefs and what I'm wanting to consume. Whereas Instagram Reels, I'm not really on it as much. I'm not really enjoying the content as much. So I'm probably not going out of my way to like those posts or go to that creator's page. And I think that trust in the algorithm is then transitive to the people that we begin following and seeing on our platforms.
Gail, when you hear that, what do you think? What do you feel?
So terrifying and yet fascinating, which is usually my reaction on this show. The trust in the algorithm, right? Like everything in my gut goes, wait, the algorithm is there to manipulate you to spend more time. And the more time that you spend, the more money the platforms can make and the more ads we can serve. Ultimately, the more marketing and commerce that can happen that fuels the whole engine. So part of me as a marketer goes, yeah, right? Win. More time, more money, more attention, which is scarce. The other part of me goes, the thing I always love about like Gen Z, and you guys help keep me honest on this, which is like, you're aware of the algorithm that's there theoretically to manipulate you, but is it manipulating you if you're aware and you're in on it? Right? You're making this conscious choice and you're noticing like the algorithm on one social versus another is one's better and it's learned you more. For whatever reasons, maybe it's better. Maybe you spent more time, right? Who knows? But I think it's super interesting. You're the first generation that's like fully in on the game. It's like you get marketing, you know what your attention's worth. You're choosing where you put it. I think that it's a little more transparent and overt than maybe prior generations where we were victims.
Maya, I want your take on this for sure. Because what I hear you saying, Gail, it feels almost like this is a crass example. It's the only thing that came to my mind. So bear with me here. Like, it's almost like Gen Z is going to the strip club knowing that the dancers don't love them. It's like, look, I know I'm not finding love in the club. Like, I'm here to spend my money for entertainment, where maybe back in the day, we was like, I found the love of my life in the club. It's like, oh, Fred, that's not love. Like, I wonder, like, Maya, am I off here? It's a crass example, I know, but like,
love it.
Those are the vibes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in everything that you were saying, Gail, what I was thinking about was this recent conversation I had with my friend about how our phones are listening to us. And her take was, I don't mind, which I thought was crazy. I'm a little worried. But she was like, you know what? It's my algorithm. It's telling me what I want to hear. It's listening to me, sure, but hey, if it helps me get like a discount that I didn't know existed, then I'm down.
Yeah.
That's kind of feeding into the idea that we're very well aware of how we're being marketed to. And a lot of the people that I've spoken to are fine being targeted as consumers because it's feeding into what they would need as consumers, right? They're enjoying it. But I think when we also look at all these areas, if you look at Gen Z, we're in this unique space where we also grew up having our teachers tell us, like, no to Wikipedia and being very well aware about our sources. And then for me, it was around high school where there was this boom of just AI. And so information was already super accessible, but then it became right there for you. It became tailored. Information wasn't just accessible, it was for your thoughts. So with what our generation consumes, the way I am and the way I see a lot of my peers, we're automatically cynics to information. We've seen a lot of misinformation. We're aware of it. We're aware that Wikipedia isn't the best, but is that the source that Gemini is telling me this is information from? Maybe. And that's not something everyone's checking. That then comes into a conversation that I would love to learn more about what you guys think about in terms of what our own social responsibility is. If not even social responsibility, but personal responsibility to kind of challenge those beliefs that we're so comfortable in.
Let's keep pulling on that because I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Like, if you know it's a ruse, are you propagating it by engaging in it as opposed to being like, no, I'm good? Julia, what's your take?
First off, just wow, Maya, you really got my head ticking with that one. I was like,
Yeah.
damn, you were spitting bars because I completely agree with so many of the things that you brought up. And I think, Marcus, to your point about like, what is our social responsibility? I think, the purpose of these news outlets and a lot of, these companies, if they're trying to spread misinformation, is because they want you to believe them, right? So whether or not you believe in the beliefs that they're promoting, I think if you choose to believe them, then you are not doing your social responsibility and you're instead feeding into their misinformation or basically satisfying what they want. But if you inside actually don't believe it or reject it, or you choose to stay true to like what you believe in or believe what you know to be is credible and real information, then you are fundamentally doing what they are, rejecting what they're trying to do. And you're sticking up for the greater social good of, believing what's real. And I think for me personally, in my experience, is that I've just been so disillusioned by major news outlets. I've seen them get things wrong. I've seen them release updates that are like, oh, like, just kidding, we did that wrong. Like, it's actually this number and stuff. And something else too I realized is that after interning or working in the workforce, these companies are made up of people just like you and me. Like, we're going to be working at big corporate companies, and I am going to be part of these campaigns that are going to be marketing or communicating to the mass audiences. Like, if I was under the name of a big publisher or just myself, the work is still mine, right? So I'm like, I know I make mistakes sometimes. I know I'm not always right. So I bet you the people that work for these companies are also just human. Like, we're all at the end of the day, like, on this way more similar playing field than I think. And I feel like I know that now because I've seen that happen at the different companies I've worked for. So it really kind of just changes my perspective in that way.
I mean, I wonder if that goes back to your early idea of that they don't have to be credentialized for you to buy in.
Yeah.
That you like, I know these folks make mistakes, right? So maybe even the ones like, you see news outlets, they'll show a photo of Lawrence Fishburne and say it's Samuel L. Jackson. You're like, fam, that is not Samuel L.
Well, and
Jackson.
It's happening more and more, right?
Yes.
Like with AI now, right? With, media companies and marketing organizations and everyone moving to efficiency through AI, we're seeing more of that. Like, that's not him. This is not Lawrence Fishburne. I know who that is, right? Like, it's crazy the level of like acceptance I think we now have. Like, I remember the days like pre-computer, because I'm old.
Seasoned. That old.
Experienced, right? Like, I was working in a PR agency. There were 48 pages of press releases on a new iron. Not the golf kind, like the laundry iron, One, no one should ever write 48 pages, certainly before computers, like insanity. And there was one typo at the end of like page 7, press release 5 on this new Norelco iron. And I almost got fired. Like, it was like one of my first jobs. And it was like, whoa, never again. And then flash forward, I got a job at Microsoft and I asked the CMO my first day there, I was like, what mistake am I going to make, Mitch? And she was like, oh, you're going to proofread your emails. Don't waste time. People are smart. I was like, oh my God, for me, that was when the world changed and I stopped proofreading, right? But that was just typos. Now you're talking facts. Do you feel like there's a point where we just stop fact checking and believe what we want to believe, or are we already there?
I feel like we're all going to internally believe kind of what we want to hear to some extent. Like, I think when it comes to hard numbers and facts and the topic that we're talking about, if it's something that is way bigger than, relationship advice or something like that, the validity of the stats does matter. And I think it more so matters that we all talk about the same ones and that we can at least agree on the hard evidence. And then your interpretation of it, that's where it's a little bit out of our control. We're going to interpret it a little bit differently based off of what we want, how we want to see it. But let's make sure that what we're all seeing is what we're agreeing upon. But I wouldn't say it's like all hope is lost. I think there are still ways that, and there are practices to try our best to make it as honest as possible.
Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like wanting to listen to brilliant young marketing students drop insights on everything from music to gaming, but instead, you get a bunch of Gen X industry long haulers reading from their lengthy thought piece that they posted on their favorite B2B social channels this morning. This format is different from any other marketing podcast because we get to hear from the market about how things actually are. And together, you get our context with their perspective. You wouldn't settle for just any old marketing insights, so don't settle for any insurance. Get the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Did you know Sam's Club isn't a store? It's actually a club. With cool finds and like a whole community. It's a club.
Of course, Jason. It's in the name. Sam's Club.
Oh, yeah. Come join us. Sam's Club.
I mean, I can't help but conjure Marshall McLuhan. It's just the media works us over completely. Like, it leaves no part of us untouched, unfiltered, unaltered, right? Like,
it's not the method, just the battering ram.
That's right. So what I want to do is just switch over to you, Aria, a bit here, because you brought up the idea of like movies. And this is like, you're right, it's an amazing summer for movies. Like Obsession, Backrooms, horror is having its moment at the moment. But my question, though, here is about, like, citing sources. When you see a trailer and then you juxtapose that to what you see on Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score and the audience score, like, how swayed are you by this? Because I've seen people that heard about a movie and go, oh, I heard it sucks. And you go, where'd you hear that? It had a bad Rotten Tomatoes score. Is that, like, the end-all, be-all here? Does it matter? Aria, talk to us.
I mean, I think this falls totally back into this idea of confirmation bias, where if I'm seeing a low Rotten Tomatoes score, but my friends are like, this is my comfort movie, I've seen this 5 times, you have to watch it, this is amazing, like, go see it, I probably will watch it. If it's like 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't care, I'll watch it because my friend told me to watch it. On the other side of that, though, if I'm seeing this movie that's like 95% Rotten Tomatoes and my friends are all like, we saw it and it was horrible, don't watch it. I'm like, well, I mean, Rotten Tomatoes is saying it's good, so I kind of want to give it a chance and give it a go. But I mean, I think even now, Rotten Tomatoes isn't having the same pull it had on me even 5-10 years ago. Letterboxd is the next big thing, right? So being able to see socially what your friends are following and how they're rating it, that falls into like social proof and, being with these people that are like you, really trusting their opinions on a platform. And then everything that you're seeing on socials, I think part of the reason why Obsession was so big was because people loved pulling clips and audio and reenacting those scenes on TikTok, which then continued to snowball into something greater where it was like, well, everybody online is talking about it. I don't want FOMO, so I don't care how many like ratings this has on Rotten Tomatoes, what percent it has on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm going to go watch it so I can be in the know.
There's the contradictions that Rotten Tomatoes doesn't matter if my friends say it's cool, but if my friends say it's good, I'm like, but Rotten Tomatoes said this. So for me, I'm like, how do y'all navigate the life that you live? If these things are sort of creating these opposites and these contradictions and these competing ideas, how do you decide what's worth your attention, your money, your effort?
The contradiction thing I think is super fascinating because I think, Maya, when you were talking about like responsibility, right? I was having this whole thing of like, it's not like social responsibility to the masses, but it's almost like you have a responsibility to yourself to open up your aperture enough. On the one side of the coin, like you need the responsibility to something bigger than the algorithm, or your life and your interests are going to get so small. But then this example is everyone's talking about Obsession. You got to go see it. Like all of a sudden now there's like mass opinion coming into your micro hyper focused feeds. Is that just the natural balance of things? Like, do you think one's more or less influential for you guys?
To me, it wouldn't matter if Rotten Tomatoes says it's amazing, because literally, like, all my roommates, they're talking about how much they love New Girl. I can't stand Zooey Deschanel. I'm sorry. Like, there's no hate against her. I haven't seen a ton by her, but I will literally never watch New Girl. Like,
get out. Schmidt's the funniest. It's such a good show.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. I don't know why. It's because I watched 500 Days of Summer and I, like, really wanted to love it, but I didn't love her character in that. So, like, literally, I cannot tell you why. I just have, like, an aversion. And I just think, like, when it's something pop culture based, like movies or music and stuff like that, I feel like it's so important to also just form your own opinion, because I think it's so easy to take the opinions of others and kind of like regurgitate them as your own, because I do that all the time, especially if it's something that I'm like, I'm going to be like self-conscious about. I don't know a ton about this, but this critic said it was like super cool and like I should love it. And then I'll be like, oh, to be a part of the conversation, I'm going to adopt the opinions that I feel like credible people or my friends that I admire a lot are saying. I think I've seen that in myself become more individualized, where it's like there's always going to be opinions. There's always going to be voices swaying you. At some point, it's just whether or not you think you yourself, it's just worth it to you and what you really value.
I mean, the idea of co-opting other people's opinion as your own, that's the entire industry of academia. It's like, it's gonna, someone says something, you're like, that's really smart. I'm just going to keep saying that over and over again. By the way, 500 Days of Summer, I can watch this movie over and over and over and over and over. If it's ever on television, I'm watching it. It gets me in my heart every single time. Okay, so we're at that part of the show. We're going to do Care or Don't Care Institution Edition. We're going to name an institution. When that institution reports information, do you care or don't care with regards to shaping your worldview and how you use that information to circulate information to your people? So, podcasts, care or don't care? Julia?
I feel like it's such a convenient way to consume media. And to me, it's not just like, oh, I'm turning on like the news broadcast or the radio and listening to someone I like don't really, really want to listen to that much. But it's like I can choose from a million different podcast creators about topics that I'm interested in. And if it's about something that, you know, again, I want there to be like, as a credentialed person, I can look up their credentials. And it's just like, I kind of just get in the flow and I like the topics they talk about. And it's like something I can tune into all the time.
Yeah.
And it really gets you sucked in. And I love that. And I think there's just so many topics that podcasts cover. And it's something that really shapes a lot of what I think about.
Maya, care or don't care?
Definitely care. I think we're also, what podcasts are uniquely good at is being about conversation. And so regardless of what perspective you're listening to, it gets you thinking. And even if you don't agree with it, you're now thinking about this topic. And it's so convenient because whoever made that podcast did the research for you. They gave you the stats, but then they're talking about their opinion. And that can get you thinking about what you might think, what you might not think. So not only does it give you information, but it brings you into the conversation.
It's just meta what you did there, because that's exactly what we're doing here. Right?
Exactly.
Here where the conversations happen, 100%. Aria, care or don't care podcasts?
I love what Maya said. I also do really care. I think podcasts do a great job at getting into niche topics when it comes to educational situations. And I love finding experts in their podcasts who can really like dive deep on different episodes and do different spins. And so throughout a couple hours of listening to them, I do almost feel connected to them in a sense. And I honestly think podcasters now are replacing the traditional influencer in a way. I always trust what podcasters have to say. And honestly, with the brand endorsements and the advertisements, I'm a lot more willing to listen to that than sit through a 90-second video on TikTok.
Yeah. All right. So podcasts, it's a thing. The market says it's a thing. What about like the traditional news sources? I'm talking New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, even television. There's NBC.
Yeah, 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Today Show.
As an institution, care or don't care, Maya, like, does it hold the same weight as podcasts that you care about?
I care. I do. And I really exceptionally care when they have social media because like I'm following the Wall Street Journal and they have like a minute long clip explaining something that I see as factual. And I love doing that. But what they do have to say, at least when it comes to news platforms that are a bit more bipartisan, that aren't as politically or like skewed in one direction or another, I do value those opinions. And maybe that's just something that's been kind of given to me as a responsibility because as a freshman at the University of Michigan, that was one of the first things we were taught. Like we were shown this big graph of all these different news sources of where they stand politically, how factual they are, how opinionated they are. And the Wall Street Journal was kind of like a happy middle for a lot of those things. So it does matter. And maybe it's less about fostering conversation, more about just knowing what's happening in the world.
Yeah. We need more media literacy. It's a must. Absolutely. Aria, care or don't care? Traditional news sources.
Okay, I might go against Maya a little bit. I would say I care for foundational stories and context. In terms of the first piece of media I'm jumping to, probably not going to be the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. I honestly think it's just because we're consuming so much media these days that's a lot easier to process than pulling up an entire article, getting a subscription, sitting down and really hunkering down. If there's an article that piques my interest, I will totally hunker down and spend like 40 minutes just scrolling and reading that. But when it comes to, you know, swaying public opinion or really taking a stance on a story, I would much rather have those conversations online, following creators that I really trust, or talking with my friends, as opposed to gathering those opinions from a large print publication.
Julia, care, don't care?
This is such a cop-out answer, but I'm in the middle. Like, I kind of care. I think because certain news outlets are so heavily politically biased and the framing leans so one way or the other, when it comes to the framing of things, I don't really trust it that much. I've become so disillusioned, so disappointed in, you know, how information has been presented, just so that way it can confirm with people's beliefs or, you know, incite a political belief. But I will still say, like, I consume the New York Times, like their podcast version of news, and then their Instagram I follow all the time. I get their like morning newsletter thing. That is my primary source for the first side of news, if that makes sense. If I heard about like this big thing just happened, or was like, oh, breaking news, like XYZ just happened, I will trust if the New York Times reported it, if Wall Street Journal reported it, or, you know, if it was just the headline, I will believe that it happened. But if I want to look deeper into the nuances of it, I'm far more picky about my sources. And that's when how much I care about these institutions kind of goes away a little bit, because I read the Morning Brew, which is like another very businessy.
Michigan alum, by the way. Michigan alum, Alex Lieberman.
Yeah, that was so cool to me. So that's like much more my reliable go-to source. Whereas these big name brand institutions, they are trustworthy to me to an extent. So it's not that I don't completely care, but I care enough to keep them around.
Wow. Really, really well said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So last one here. Is care or don't care with regards to creators? What I really want to do is actually rank these. Like, gun to head, you had to choose a citation, a source for information. Are you going to a creator? Are you going to the news publication or podcasts?
What about brands? Can we add brands?
That's actually a good shout. That's a good shout, Gail, because they are in many ways a publisher in and of themselves. They are producing information, points of view about things beyond just the value proposition. So gun to head, creator, podcast, publisher, brand. Go.
I'd say publishers first.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the source of truth, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd say podcasts, then creators, and then brands. And love brands and everything, but in my mindset, it's because those last two, creators and brands, get something out of me consuming their information. They're selling me something. In my mind, a news publication, a conversation on a podcast, that's to give information. That is to educate me. And I can choose to disagree with it. But maybe I'm naive in that way, but I don't see an ulterior motive to sharing information from those than a brand that might be selling a product or a person that has a background deal with them.
Unless the publisher is driven by, if it bleeds, it leads, so they can get more views just to sell more things.
That is true.
Which I think is, again, it's the system that we're in, right?
Yeah, I think we're increasingly all ad supported, right? And I think it's the same thing the creators face, right? Podcasters face. Like, is it okay to do a host read for this product, but maybe not this one? And, is it okay to read something somebody handed me, even if I don't use it, or I drive a different car? Or, I think everyone's in trying to support media. It's that age-old question, which, I think comes down to consumers don't like paying subscriptions, right? And the only way around subscriptions is advertising and free content.
This is the complexity of this whole thing. I think it's a very, very complex thing that we are negotiating trust. Okay, Aria.
Gun to head, I am definitely citing a publisher first.
Okay.
And I think it's because of what Julia mentioned of these are the facts of the story. And if I'm writing an academic article or if I'm writing a piece that requires citations, I think it's so deeply ingrained in me to go to a really credible source. And we've been raised knowing that credible sources, again, aren't things like Wikipedia, even though we may get our information from there. It's things like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Forbes to cite. And then I'd probably go to podcasts after that because a lot of times it's an expert that is researching, pulling data from these sources like news articles and publishers. And then, of course, creators and brands, like Maya said, are at the very bottom just because it does sometimes feel like there's an ulterior motive, that they're not being totally honest with us. But the question was different. And it was like, how can I convince my friends of X, Y, and Z? I think the order would be completely different.
Super interesting.
Julia, gun ahead. Bring us home.
I have to go with publisher first, podcasters, brands, and then content creators. The more we talk about it, the more I realize it's like I could say all I want. And I still do believe, obviously, everything I said.
Yeah.
But it's like publishers, New York Times, I've just hold them to this standard of like, this is far more credible than some .com, some .net, some blog or whatever on the internet. So I don't know why. When you ask me that question, I want to say it should be podcasters, but I really couldn't honestly say that. It has to be publishers for me because, they have boots on the ground journalism and they have their whole reputation, which is really strong, relies on the fact that they can put forth information that is credible. And, how much do you believe it? It's in what sources you're going to, that's different, but, that's their whole thing that they're built on. So I do believe them a lot.
I wonder if this is a case of that, maybe there is a thing that you rationalize in your minds or in our collective minds, but perhaps we don't feel like we're in gun-to-head situations where it's that I have to find the source. I mean, during COVID, if it wasn't coming from the CDC or something like that, I was like, don't believe it.
Right.
Because that was a gun-to-head situation. But I guess when we're walking through life, navigating life, we're not operating at those level of stakes, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's because I feel like so many of the topics we encounter and the situations we encounter are just too nuanced in life to have a right or wrong, credible, believe it or not, don't believe it. There are things that other publications or podcasters that I don't love, they'll say stuff. I'm like, you know what? I most of the time don't really believe your arguments, but you've got a point here. And I think it's these issues are too complex to be there's one side of truth and then there's the whole other part of there's is everything else.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's just I try to form my own nuanced opinion based off of the things I've collected from things that I trust, but that I don't always agree with, because I want to believe that I can create an opinion that is founded on my beliefs, but based on truth and facts.
Well said. Aria, Julia, Maya, you never cease to amaze. but I'm very, very grateful for your insight, for your perspective, not just the way you articulated, but actually the candor in which you brought forward. And as we, sign off, the final thought, and I'm curious for your final thought, Gail, before we say goodbye here, is that I still go back to Marshall McLuhan. The media works us over completely, but the media that I think we typically confine McLuhan's thinking is like the actual media we read, television, print, out-of-home radio. But there's the media of people that I think that we don't really factor into that negotiation.
Yeah. Because
all the things that we heard today is really not just the source itself, but it's the people on the other end of the source.
Yeah.
And how that information gets negotiated with my people who are like me, which is in and of itself its own credentialized source. The media works us over completely. The media people, that being the media we don't think enough about.
Yeah, no, I am encouraged, right? Processing what I just heard from you guys, from Maya, Julia, Aria, you're pro-journalism, which I love.
Amen.
I think it's so important. And you named a lot of institutions. They spend a lot of money and they don't get enough ad dollars, right? Because the marketers are like, oh, I don't want to be near politics or controversy. And so the very institutions you're going, hey, they are credible. You're saying they're up there in your one or two of trusted sources. And yet, as for the marketers that are listening to this show, you got to support them, right?
Yeah.
You got to support journalism. It's okay. We can separate. If you guys understand the algorithm, you know the difference between the ad in the content and the content. So I think there's a good wake-up call here for me, which is you guys know the institutions and you respect journalism. I think that's a really important takeaway for marketers who may be investing more in AI slop than journalism today. So as you're thinking about your budgets, maybe a little less slop, a little more journalism. Just a thought.
Well said. Aria, Julia, Maya, thank you so very much. And thank you all to the listeners again for joining us for another episode of Market Says. This is a place where we learn.
Yeah.
We learn so very much. The tables turn. We are the students and the market is the teacher. Thank you all for teaching us. Peace.
Market Says is a Bubbler Media iHeart podcast production. If you're not in the conversation, you're not in the game.
When you join Sam's Club, you get way more than you'd expect. You don't just get value. You get insider tips from fellow members. You don't just pick up a pizza. You actually vote on its toppings. Bacon crumbles. You don't just visit the club, because with the Sam's Club app, everywhere can be the club. You don't just shop the latest finds. You find your people. And at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Come join us. Sam's Club.